Yes. All right. Welcome to our monthly series of Edgar Cayce on. Tonight, John Schroeder, who we all love and appreciate doing this for us, will be talking about in his presence. In his presence is a very interesting concept because it can take on a lot of different meanings. For example, how would you act if you were in his presence on your day-to-day routine? Would you act the way you do now if you knew that he was right next to you the whole time? You could look at him and physically perceive him? Would your thoughts, words, and deeds be the same, or would they perhaps be different? Yeah. But the truth of the matter is, and the Cayce readings tell us that there's a lot of different ways of looking at being in his presence. That's simply just one of them. Another one is, what would you doing? Would you be trying to do what he would do? Or would you be trying to do what he would want you to do? Because you're going to try to impress the boss, right? I mean, think about how we operate in our mental minds. We have jobs and the boss comes in, well, we got to impress the boss. Well, guess who's the boss on a spiritual level? Exactly, the big boss, right? So, when we're in his presence, we need to recognize that it's not trying to emulate so much what it would be that he would do, because he was at a different level. The Jesus of the Bible that we're familiar with was at a different spiritual level than we are. We're probably not quite there yet. Consequently, the things that he did were to be more of a pattern for us. We're not going to necessarily be able to emulate everything that he did, but we can put forward loving thoughts, loving words, loving deeds, proceed with loving kindness. I think that's what he would have us do, as opposed to trying to do the exact tasks that he would do. This chapter in Search for God is actually really interesting because this is one of the, to me personally, is one of the more meaningful chapters. It got me to thinking about, okay, am I in his presence? We're always in his presence. And our minds, our physical minds, have tendencies to think that, well, things are going bad for us, that, well, God doesn't love me anymore. Well, the truth of the matter is, just turn around, he'll be there. And he's always there. Because it was we who turned around away from them and him. So we don't need to do that. We're always in his presence. And if we know that, then we should act that way. And again, it comes down to our human emotion and our free will. We have choices. We could choose to act with loving kindness, or we could choose to defer to our egocentric selves and take on a less than loving attitudes. A lot of that comes from not remembering that he is right there with us at all times. So, when we come back from break after John's first session here, I'm going to give you another take on being in his presence. One that I use just about every day, and I'll share that with you. But now, the man of the hour, the legend himself, Mr. John Schroeder.
Not that you folks haven't got this disclaimer memorized, but because we do have these being recorded to go on the edgarcayceaz.org website after we've gone ahead and done them here, we put the recording on the website. We want to make sure that the disclaimer's up there that lets you know that this, as I always say, is the gospel according to John. And that is my take on the Cayce readings that have to do, that went together in the 262 reading series to put together the chapter in A Search for God in His Presence. So if any of you at the end of this talk, I'll have my email address up there, will be able to go ahead and order the entire PowerPoint presentation or even a PDF copy, Adobe Reader copy, of the readings that went into being able to do this. So in His presence has a lot of meanings, as Steve said, to different people. I'll tell you, the first time that I really started thinking about this was humorously many years ago. I had a girlfriend whose family, actually there were 10 children, 6 boys, 4 girls, and the 6 boys all became Southern Baptist ministers. Imagine me trying to go over there and fit in with that family. That was a doomed relationship. But this is really the way that they thought about things. Go ahead and take a look at that for a moment. Jesus' coming looked busy. Now, his constant, the father of the patriarchal family structure there, was always coming in and say, is that what you would want to be doing if the Lord showed up today? It was like, wow. You know, it was like religion and God and being in his presence was being used as a threat, as opposed to what a wonderful thing it would be if he could come on in and sit down and have dinner and pet my dog and, you know, we could just talk about things. But that was not the way it was being used in the traditional Christian sense. It was being used in a, you're going to be very embarrassed when Jesus shows up and you're not doing the right thing. So I definitely understood why I was not a Southern Baptist at that point, even in that early stage of my life with my first girlfriend. So, boy, I don't know if you can even read those with the small type, but again, just to give a brief introduction for the people at home, the number down here is the Edgar Cayce reading, the 262 are all the Search for God readings. This means it was the 33rd one, and that was the date that the reading was given. You'll see that at the bottom of each one of these. When you are looking at the text of the reading itself, it is verbatim, excuse me. But when you see the bolding and the underlining, that is my emphasis on there in order to be able to draw out of the reading what it is that caused me to put this on to the presentation. There are other things that if they come up, in fact I know they will, if you see a half or semicircle parentheses, that's something I've inserted for clarification. If you actually see brackets, that's something that the stenographer Gladys Davis Turner inserted into the reading, was not actually said by Cayce himself. The last one is when you see like he wills and you see the capital H-E, that is not a typo. That is her way of putting an emphasis. When Cayce was giving the reading, he apparently said, he wills that all should, instead of he wills that all should. You see what I'm doing with the emphasis? So I'm trying to bring you into what it was like to sit there in front of Cayce when he did this. All right, so we're talking about the 6th question, or the 6th paragraph that had to do with this reading. And it was the people, or one of the people in the study group, who was asking to expand on how they can come into the realization of his presence. Now you can go through and read the first part, which I have, but it is leading up to the part where I have underlined. We come to this knowledge and consciousness by doing those things that are conducive to bringing into every atom of our being that which gives the attributes of his presence in the earth. And in doing this, do we come to know his presence. One thing that I have loved about the Cayce readings, more than just about any other thing that I have studied out there, and I'll tell you, I've looked at a lot of Rudolf Steiner and other even psychic information, Madame Blavatsky and things like that, but Cayce is so big on application. It isn't just enough to study this information, it is actually to bring it inside of yourself and start living it, breathing it, thinking it. I remember my father really had a penchant for other languages, foreign languages. He was able to speak Spanish, Portuguese. He picked up Italian and things like that on his travels, because he would travel all over the world, and he was fluent in Spanish. And I said, oh my gosh, I can't think. And, you know, I can't allow myself to learn another language. I'm very bad at it. And he goes, the problem is, and you need to get over this, he goes, I was not good at it either, as long as I would take a word and try to translate it. He goes, you have to think in Spanish in order to become fluent in Spanish. You have to think in that language. Hi, Maddie. So you wind up having this same information is coming through in the Cayce readings, in which my father was telling me, if you want to be able to become fluent in this language, you have to think in that language. And what is this, this entire quote is really going in that direction. It says, if you want to be in his presence, if you want to live and move and have your very being in a loving consciousness, you have to think in those terms, in every atom of your being, in order to be able to do that. Now, you have to look at it from the perspective of how in the world, if we're not really perfect, I mean, you know, from the time we start making choices, we're always going to be messing up in one way or another. How do we ever make perfect choices that are out there? Cayce is very clear. He goes, you don't do this all at once. He says it over and over again, line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little, there a little. And it goes just like layers of an onion, one at a time. And you keep, I'm going to go forth and not sin anymore. Whoops, I just sinned. All right, now I'm going to go forth and not sin anymore. And I kid you not, it's like that every single time. We're going to keep screwing up, and then we're going to endeavor to do better. We're never going to give up trying to go forward with that. I think the Japanese had a wonderful kind of a philosophical way of saying, how do you become perfect? You start with this great big, and using an analogy of a statue or a metaphor of a statue, you can say, here's this big block of marble. Now take away everything that isn't part of the perfect outcome that you want to have for that statue. Just keep removing these things until you wind up having the perfect statue left over. Well, the best thing about us is that we were created in God's perfect image. And because of that, there is this perfect statue that's inside of us that absolutely does not sin. Now, we've added stuff to it. That's the point. We are that perfect marble statue in the metaphor of the Japanese culture. But if we have that perfection within us already, what do? We just remove this piece that doesn't belong, that piece, and that can be things like fear, guilt, shame, gossip, and, getting into all the negativity out there. You just keep removing those things, and the next thing you know, you wind up being what you're created to be to begin with. So we have it within ourselves already to be perfect, because we are indeed perfect within. We just keep removing or choosing to get rid of the things that are not perfect that are within us. Okay, now going back to the top here, it's same 262 and this one's dash 32. The mental world is looking to the spiritual minded for hope. I'm going to stop there for a moment. Talking in the mental world, what Cayce is talking about is the astral world. All of us in between lives. When we pass on from this life, we go into what's called a life review. I'll come back to that later on. But we go into a life review, not a last judgment. The last judgment, it says you're going to heaven or hell. That has nothing to do with what Cayce says reality is on the other side once we pass over. The life review is where we get to see what happened in its entirety in the life that just passed and be able to say, these are the things where I gained, these are the things I could learn from. And in that life review, you're in the mental world reviewing that, and you're seeing what it takes to be able to come back into the earth and try to take away more of the pieces of your imperfect statue. And so you're in the mental world. When I say you, I'm talking about all of us on the other side looking over here to the earth plane and say, oh my gosh, are we hoping that we can gather together enough people who are spiritually minded, who are not just here for our selfish outcomes, that we're trying to make loving choices out of there. And we're really hoping for that, because that makes our lives a whole lot easier when the people that we hang out with are also trying to do the same thing. For that thought that will guide all men closer to his presence. I don't know how many of you are parents. I'm certainly not, but I have had the outcome or experience, if you will, of being a teenager and hanging out with the wrong crowd and the right crowd, and seeing what a difference that made in my life, who I decided to associate with. It's a very different group to be able to stay with everybody that's in here right now compared to going out and hanging out in the bars on Van Buren Boulevard. I mean, just to make it that clear, it's a very different group, and it causes different things to come out of us. One example that I'll give you on this I found fascinating. I don't know how many of you have heard of Herb and Ann Purrier with the Logos Center, but Ann is one who is able to see auras, that color pattern around the body. And Stephanie and I, years ago in the 1980s, a whole decade, we owned and operated a no-alcohol teenage nightclub. And that was in California. Well, Herb and Ann came from Arizona and visited us one night, went to the club while it was open. And so here I am, I'm talking to him, and actually I was talking to Ann, and Herb started wandering closer to the dance floor where all the kids were dancing out there. And I constantly asking Ann, what is it like to see the auric pattern around him right now? I said, what's the auric pattern of all the kids out there? And she goes, there is a combination of just a deep, dark, very powerful red. So it was a light of base energy, like in the gonadal energy, that they were just boom, 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 to the beat of the music. And I said, And what's Herb's, I mean, is that happening? And she goes, oh, this is fascinating. She just stopped and stared at him. She goes, the closer he gets, the more definition of his own color patterns and his auric pattern started turning more red with each step as he got to the dance floor. This, to me, that was a fascinating visual right there. She's going, oh my gosh, this is my dear, sweet, loving husband who believes in the God of unconditional love that's turning more and more red as he gets to the dance floor. So we need to be very careful about who it is that we hang out with. And I'll also say that there's a difference between the person and the personality in the Cayce readings, and that is that we are who we are. I mean, from one lifetime to another, we are the same soul. But we can have very, very different personalities. I can tell you just from the past lives that have been made aware to me that I was a poor dirt farmer in the deep south in my last incarnation and was not spiritual at all and really screwed things up and decided to use World War II to check out so I could come back in and do things better this time. I was also a soldier back in the Ferdinand and Isabella days that was tasked with kicking the Moors and the Jews out of not one of my fancier lifetimes, but I was very good about saying that you can convert, leave, or die. Those are your three choices. And that was what my job was as a military guy at that time. I have also been a lawyer. I've also been a businessman over and over again. And can you imagine me having the same personality as I have right now in each one of those incarnations? And the answer is no. And the best way to be able to think of this is with an iceberg. You know, with an iceberg, you only see 10% of it on top. And if you think of that iceberg just shifting, you're still seeing the same iceberg right there, but you have a different part of it that's exposed above the water. That's a really good analogy to be able to understand how we can still be the same iceberg and manifest a very different personality each time we come into the earth. And the reason for that is because we can have different lessons to learn. And the different lessons that we learned that had to do with family. I mean, maybe I need to come in as a woman. Maybe I need to come in as somebody who is not, not particularly bright or in poverty or in great wealth. And all of those things would have an effect on your personality, and so that does make a difference. But one of the things that's difficult to understand for people who do not believe in reincarnation is if you don't remember your past lives, how come, what good is it that you go into this life if you don't have any memories of previous lifetimes, if you're not really learning the lessons of one to another? I never saw this episode, but my wife Stephanie did on The Outer Limits. Not the original one, but they did a remake of that many years later. And they had an episode of The Outer Limits in which there was a woman who was able to not remember her past lives, because the premise of the show was everybody on Earth remembered all of their past lives. And she was the one who didn't. She was sought after like nobody's business to find out how are you able to forget that. And the reason being is because if you remember all these past lives, what do? You wind up falling into the same pattern. You go, I'm a Jew, I'm a Gentile, I'm an Egyptian, I'm a Nazi, I'm a this, I'm a that. And the people said, well, now that I remember all the lifetimes, this is where I have to go. These are my people. I'm going to fall right back into the same pattern all over again, and I'm not going to be able to have any progress. It would be such a blessing if I did not remember my past lives. Now, I can give you an example of how this does work in spirituality very easily today. It didn't used to be that way. But, by the way, Steve, you might want to close that laptop, because if we keep the screen burning, it might, it'll kill the battery before I'm done talking. Yeah, and then I'll have to do my standard comedy routine, and they'll be very sorry. So Cayce walked into a bar when Mercury was in retrograde. So it wasn't until more recent times that we start to have an analogy of technology that helps us to understand how reincarnation works. Has anyone ever played an online video game? I actually haven't, but I've watched people do this. Do you understand what I'm saying if I say something like World of Warcraft? Or and so that you actually log online and you get into this website and it says, I want to become a character. I'm going to be a magician. I'm going to be a cleric. I'm going to be a soldier. I'm going to be a this or that. And you actually pick up this personality and you have this little iconic character that runs around in whatever the a lot of times they're military, sometimes they're in the medieval times, but it's a entire world that is developed for you to interact in. And the point is that you are still the person that's sitting at home on your couch with your little game controller, and you're causing this guy to go around and do things. And this little guy has a personality. If it's a witch, it does witch things. If it is if it's a soldier, it does soldier things. If it's a troll, it does troll things. I don't want to get into the details of it, but if you understand how each one of those would be a different personality, and if you have different iconic characters that you use to get in there, you have to play by the rules of what the limitations of that character are. In other words, if you're a magician, you have magic spells to be able to overcome the obstacles that run into you there. If you're a soldier, you've got swords and shields and bows and arrows and things like that in the case of World of Warcraft. And so you have to play within the reality of what you are given, the tools that you have to work with in that particular character. Now, is it any different in incarnating into the earth? If we come in and we say, I have great wealth or I have poverty, I'm borderline in the autistic scale, or I'm a genius IQ like Einstein. You see what I'm getting at? That these are the rules that we have for these physical bodies that are limitations of what we have to be able to work with. I can tell you it's been a very different thing for me to be able to come into this lifetime with the information of the Cayce readings to be able to examine all of life and make choices on what's working for me and how I want to proceed with my life and the choices I make, compared to that past life I had in World War II, where I was just in the Deep South, had no idea about spirituality at all, and had no tools to be able to try to approach life from a position of unconditional love. So those are two very different iconic characters that the soul of John Schroeder, or whatever my name was back then, from the other side has to work through and see what's the best I can do. And then you add the free will of other people interacting with you that, oh my gosh, you have no idea what can really mess up in World of Warcraft when the other folks get in there. So you have your stereotypes, but the interesting part of this is no matter what, the choices, the free will of the person playing the character behind it, no matter what their limitations are, they still go in the same direction. So if you can understand that kind of an analogy, you can understand what happens from a reincarnation standpoint. We are on a soul level getting everything that's happening here, and it is, as in the wings of our own thoughts, our soul manifesting through our conscious mind to make the choices that we do. How do you wind up having twins in the same family and they wind up having such different personalities when when they're raised? By the same parents in the same place, even have the same DNA, and they can have two different personalities like that. There's no question in my mind that it is very similar to what I'm talking about with a soul and a soul manifesting through those two identical setups having very different outcomes. Let me be persistent and keep my sights on that above that I am ever contending in His name. I have no idea where that came from, but I saw it on Google Images and grabbed it because I really like the idea in the Cayce readings over and over again is persistency. It isn't just enough to try, as I said before, but to try again and again and again. Do not get discouraged, because we are absolutely guaranteed that eventually we will be able to take away all those pieces that aren't perfect and manifest the true people, souls that we were intended to be and created to be. One of the things that happens to us is that, I've talked about hanging out with the wrong people and all that. This is so true on earth, because who is it that we are hanging out with? Who is on the earth plane right now? And the truth is, we are all people who have made less than loving decisions to wind up here in the first place. That's why we have the limitations of who we are in the world right now. Now, if we go out there and start saying, well, I'm doing better than the Joneses next door or the Browns across the street, and we're comparing who we are to those other people and saying, hey, I'm doing okay, I've got to tell you, that is the wrong standard to be able to use on this. I always have a line, in fact, it's down there in the bottom. Judging our own success by comparing ourselves to others here on earth is like wanting to be one of the cool people in the insane asylum so that everyone else is jealous of you. That is who I mean, it's done with humor. I'm bringing that. I'm not trying to put everybody down. I'm trying to do it with humor, going, do you want to sit at the cool table in the insane asylum? Is that really your biggest goal? Or do you really want to look beyond being limited within that asylum and say there is a whole big world to be able to participate in out there? And you should really look forward to it if you would open your eyes to what lies ahead for each and every one of us, instead of being satisfied with sitting at the cool table. So that is a perspective of why the Cayce readings over and over again recommend Jesus as being the way, the truth, and the life. He lived a perfect life to be the perfect role model for each one of us to see what it is that perfection, the Christ consciousness, perfect unconditional love came into this life and was faced with some of the toughest decisions that anyone would ever have to make, and wound up saying things like, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." That would not have been my response, okay? But it was his, and so I really have to keep looking in that direction. 262:13, for all are witnesses unto the effect of his presence in our lives. This is such an important, and Steve made this point in the intro there, for all are witnesses unto the effect of his presence in our lives. I don't think there's anyone out here that hasn't felt God touch them at some point, where you've really been in a bad way and say, "God, help me." And you've had an immediate, at least in my situation, I've had immediate responses to that. If I've just been absolutely overwhelmed and I really reach out like that, I just get flooded with calm down. It's going to be okay. And I just start getting this feeling going, but it's still as bad as it was just 5 seconds before when I was feeling all this anxiety. But calm down and let's go ahead and figure our way through this. It's really the point trying to get across here. We can all say that there is a time in our life when we have had that happen. Now, I can tell you in the Cayce readings, they give you an example over and over again of how to be able to access that faster, better, more reliably. And I've got to say what that is prayer and meditation. Prayer is talking to God. Meditation is listening to God. And to be able to keep that channel open by talking with God, by listening, you're asking questions, right? So you do want to listen to what God has to say. I highly recommend it. And so you make that channel. You keep it open, and it doesn't allow it to get rust or dust or anything like that. You keep that channel open, then it's available for you. I'll share a story with you of when this really had its greatest effect on me. When I was growing up, I have been blessed and cursed, I'll put it that way, with an ability to just sit there and analyze things that go out into infinity. I don't know if you ever hear the story of Nikola Tesla, the one that was a contemporary with Edison. That man was able to build a machine in his mind, start the thing working, and see where it would break. By the thing working in his mind, not actually having physical parts. And I read about that and going, boy, what a talent that something like that would be. Well, in my mind, what I can do is take a theological concept and I'll throw that sucker out into eternity and say, this will work and these are the flaws and that don't work for me in terms of a God of unconditional love. Well, here's a problem. If you have a finite understanding and you have an infinite universe, and my finite mind has been so used to being able to put my arms around any concept that is out there, here's one that just frightened me to death. And that is, if we have infinity in front of us, that means it never ends. And here I am experiencing life, and at what point are we going to run out of things to do? Now this may not be anything you've ever considered before, but imagine being, and I'm not kidding, 6, 7 years old, and I'm having these thoughts. I literally thought that we would run out of things to do. And I'm 6 or 7 years old. I do not have the linguistic skills to be able to verbalize what this is. My parents actually thought, because I couldn't really verbalize it very well, they thought I was being afraid of death. I wasn't afraid of death at all. Death would have been thankful rather than having an eternity of boredom. But I didn't know how to say it better. And so I said, what happens, in the future after we die? And so that was where they got hung up on that, and I didn't know how to word it better. So here I had, even as I get older, I still have this. Now I even have more mental faculties behind it, and I'm locked into this pattern. Believe me, I understand what PTSD people go through, in that they wind up having this traumatic thing happen to them, and they can't help but just run that problem through their mind the exact same way over and over. Well, I wasn't able to pull my mind out of that, and it would almost bring on an anxiety attack on occasion when I go out there and go, what if eternity has absolutely nothing but boredom ahead for us? And that really did bother me a lot. Then I don't know, I was probably in my 30s when I had an event that really changed everything for me. It has to do with being in his presence. I was listening to a classical song. I grew up a band geek, so even though I listened to the Beatles and Beach Boys and all the other top 40 groups out there at the time, I also listened to classical music. And there was one that I really liked in particular. It was called "In the Hall of the Mountain King" from Peer Gynt. Yeah, I won't sing it for you because that's not what I do. But but if you know the song, it is just very stirring. It's very short too. It's maybe 3 minutes, 3.5, and in that it just starts building and building and building, and then it has an incredible way of resolving itself and being able to just have this dramatic ending. And it moves me every time I hear it. Just really has this effect on me. And I remember I was at home alone, and I was in the living room, and I was listening to this thing, and I just grabbed a hold of a feeling for a moment that said that if I can listen to this song over and over and it just doesn't have any effect, I mean, it never stops having this incredible effect on me. And this is just this one song, and there's an infinite amount of music to be able to work out there. How could you ever wind up being bored in eternity? And I actually got that at a core level that I can't describe any better than I just have right here. And I was sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, this is an answer to something I've been looking for my entire life. And then I wound up having a statement that came through as if somebody was standing behind me and just said it into my brain. I didn't hear it with my ears, I just heard it in my brain. And it said, if you think that there is no boredom in eternity, you are correct. But let me take this a step further and say that if all you were to do is bask in my presence for eternity, it would be enough. It would be enough to do nothing but bask in eternity, in the presence of God in unconditional love, and to just feel that love and to share that love back and forth. That alone would be enough to be able to be satisfied. Now add the infinite number of combinations of everything that we have in front of us, not only with the things that we can wind up doing, but with the infinite number of souls that we have to do it with. And I wound up feeling pretty silly at the end of that. As far as how in the world could I have ever thought we would run out of things to do when I had that realization. But if you're talking about something that had bothered you for your entire life, and then to have that moment where you just reached out and you said, oh, there is the answer for me forever. That was really a very big life-changing moment for me. There is no power, no strength, save in Him. And then it goes on to talk about how pathetic we are when you were to take, if you take a Bill Gates or a, President of the United States or any of the world powers out there and talk about how puny their strength is in comparison to God. And so if you were to say, if you think that the President of the United States wields the ultimate power in the earth, you're going, it's puny. It's nothing compared to what the changes are that happen when God steps in to be able to change things around. We are but a shadow of what is shown in Him. Now, one of the things those of you who share the time we spend in the Search for God study group on the first and third Monday nights here have heard me talk about this crazy chiropractor that I used to see. He was definitely a shaman named Dr. Jonathan Ramos. And I had been to this guy a few times, and I won't go into the other stories, but one of the better lessons that he taught me was I was this person that really had an external locus of control. Or, I'm sorry, internal. And what that means is that I believe that I can make anything happen in my life that I want. I don't think anybody has control of me on the outside, that my free will makes me the ruler of my own destiny. There is a downside to that. That was how I was raised, and I was so clear on it that it makes you want to do everything yourself. You don't look for help. Now, you can sit there and say, God help me, I'm panicked about, the anxiety that I'm feeling or whatever. And I was always open to that. But I never reconciled this thing of, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to do it, and all I have to do is choose right, make the right choices, and, take away this bad piece and that bad piece of the statue. And this Dr. Jonathan Ramos, while I was sitting there in his office one day, and he was a chiropractor, so he's doing that sort of thing too, and he goes, there's something you really need to know about life. So what's that? He goes, you don't get extra points by not asking for help. And I hadn't really even thought about the idea that is it a point system? Are we here on Earth trying to figure out, okay, if I can have the high score in the video game or whatever measurement we have on that sort of thing, am I really trying to see if I did it myself? Are you going to be any more welcome a prodigal child back into the arms of God because you did it without help? Or is it like Cayce says, that each and every one of us gets into heaven by leaning on the arm of someone we've helped? That's the way you get there. You lean on the arm of someone that you've already helped too, and between the two of you, you're able to go ahead and both of you come out symbiotically better for what happens in your life. So if we can do nothing of ourselves, it makes so much sense to understand that if the way, the truth, the light, the power, the strength is all in Him, that we invite God into every aspect of our lives. John Eldredge has a quote up here which I've enjoyed, in that he's kind of a motivational speaker and spiritual. He's mainly a traditional Christian, but he's got some pretty good takes on Jesus. Security is not found in the absence of danger, but in the presence of Jesus. So if everything in our life winds up being kittens and rainbows, if nothing but good things ever happen to us, do we ever feel like we need God? Of course we do, but do we ever feel, if nothing ever challenges us, we go, God, I've got this. I'm in good shape here. I seem to be able to handle everything. But from the idea of, you've probably heard that old cliche that there are no atheists in foxholes. Okay? If you're an atheist and you're in the midst of something so horrible as to say, out there in the battlefield and all the horrendous things that can happen right there, what in the world goes on in their mind? You will either go insane or you will reach out to God. One of those two things has to be inevitable when you're encountering the worst stuff that can ever happen to a human being in life. And so I really want to make sure that we understand that, hey, if we're feeling like everything's great, because I got to admit, I live the life of Riley right now. I am retired. I play about 20 hours of pickleball a week. I get to write things that I want, do talks like this that I really enjoy, research the Cayce readings, go ahead and meet with people I love, and doing the Edgar Cayce study groups and the friends of mine. I just don't have anything go wrong in my life anymore. But I never forget this part of it, that I'm just enjoying the good times right now, because they don't always, wind up being that way, especially here on Earth. And I do recognize that there are no atheists in foxholes. Next reading up. Please expand on how we may prepare ourselves that we may abide in His presence. I really like the answer on here. This would refer rather to the individual experience. For in the preparations of self, there are varied consciousnesses, and what to one might be necessary to another would be secondary. Jumping down, through meditation and prayer and application of that we seek in the way of preparation. So to condense what's being said here, we're saying that there isn't just one way to live your life. Some people need to come in and be a traditional Christian. Some need to be Muslim or Jewish or Hindu or Mormon or whatever it winds up being in terms of the religion, because that's what they need for their next steps on the path. It doesn't mean, in fact, Cayce is very clear. He says that all of the religions don't go toward Christianity. All of the religions go to Jesus, saying that he's the way, the truth, and the life. It's not saying that it's the Christian way of looking at Jesus that does that. All of the religion, I don't know a religion that says Jesus is a bad guy and you shouldn't listen to him. Even the Jews, even the Muslims, even the Hindus, all of them talk very highly of Jesus. But Cayce says, pull Jesus out of Christianity, put him over here, and all these religions are taking you to that perfect role model over there, and that's really why there shouldn't be a religion that we say this one's better than the other one. So in other words, how do we prepare ourselves? Each of these things are steps along the way. But the best way to be able to do it is not by what religion you are, but through meditation and prayer and applying the things that we learn in life in order to be able to take those pieces away. Instead of a knee-jerk reaction with anger or hate or bigotry or whatever gossip, whatever it winds up being that causes us to have that bad piece of the statue on us, we need to try to do what we can to overcome that. The one thing I really catch from so many of the religions is that there is an absolute morality. There is a yes or no answer to abortion. There is a yes or no answer to divorce. There is a yes or no answer to suicide. The Cayce readings say, if the soul is eternal and invulnerable, how can you wind up ever having, murder as we think of it in ending a life? You didn't end a life, but you ended the physical corporeal form that our soul was occupying at the time. But if you're looking at it, if you are killing somebody in battle, you have a choice of looking at it as, and the country needs to be protected, and I have no negative feelings towards you necessarily, just what it is that each of us stand for at this point. Then you can go into war and not have it be nearly the sin of, you SOB, I am going to kill you for being the ugly, awful person you are and stand for. All right? Those are two very different ways to approach being a soldier in battle. And frankly, since only 1 out of 9 soldiers in any branch of the military winds up actually seeing combat, I was in the military, so I get to know these statistics. Only 1 out of 9 actually sees combat. That's telling you that there are not so many people that really have karmic influences that say, I must experience the horrors of war out there. So most of us really do have a decent handle on it. We just get this secondary where our friends die and we have all of the other negative connotations of that. So we want to make sure that we understand that the laws, morals, ethics, all of those are subject to where we're coming from. Whether it's okay to abort a baby or not, Cayce says, guess what? It's really not an ultimate right or wrong. It's how you felt about it. If you thought you were murdering a child, you better not do it. If you believe in reincarnation and all you did was delay the opportunity for the child to be able to come back in, maybe into a better opportunity for them to grow, then maybe that was the right choice to make. But it's up to you as the individual in order to be able to do that. But the one thing that is absolute is meditation and prayer and always applying the laws of unconditional love. Absolute, unconditional, positive regard for everybody that you run into. Quote from the Bible, "Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven." I'll come back to this later on, but the Cayce readings have a very interesting definition for the word glory, or to glorify. Actually gives a definition that says glory is the ability to serve. Glory is the ability to serve. When you think of that definition of glory, I'll tell you what, that answered, when I read that in the Cayce readings, that answered one of the biggest questions that I had from the beginning. Because frankly, from a traditional Christian standpoint, it says, or Catholics or whatever, are saying our purpose is to give glory to God. All right? Now, what is that? I'm going, is God this egotistical guy with the big beard that sits up on a throne and he needs us to sit there and glorify him? What kind of a God is that? I mean, if God actually creates us so he can feel, hey, look at me, I'm God, I'm going, that is exactly the opposite of what I have ever thought about a God of unconditional love. But if you take that word glory and say it is the ability to serve, God glorified by us is being more God, more unconditionally loving every time we manifest the ability to serve others. And God glorifies us. It even says that in the Bible. God's glorifying us as in being of service to us. Think about the Last Supper, in which Jesus sat down, knelt down, and washed the feet of the disciples in front of him, saying, "He that would be the master of all must be the servant of all as well." That is the ability to serve, to go out there and serve each and every other person in front of you as we serve others, and that way we serve God. We are glorifying God, and God is glorifying us. And guess what? Since we are all part of God, doesn't that seem like it's a really nice circle that gets completed right there in terms of the ability to serve is also the ability to glorify in both directions? It really brings an entirely different look at what something like this word would talk about, where instead of it being a big guy on a throne that says, "I need my ego puffed up," to we have a workable, infinitely wonderful way of working with each other through unconditional love. Let each live that others may know that that individual is keeping that presence they hold as their ideal, to be a living example of that they profess. One of the things, especially in this day and age of our presidential election, I have to go back to the world readings that Cayce gave, in which he is very clear, saying that each country winds up with the elected leadership that it deserves. God help us. I think about, these are the choices that we have out there, and this is what we deserve. Well, I have a video that I'm actually going to have everybody feeling better about politics before we leave here tonight, but that's a video that we'll be showing later on. But I do want to give a couple of different perspectives, and this one that I'm going to give two sides to has to do with fundraising and a prosperity consciousness. A number of years ago, half my life ago, from 1985 to 1990, I served as a Board of Trustees member on the national board for the ARE. I'm on the board with Steve Bobbitt as the local, well, I say local, state of Arizona. We're on the board for the Arizona ARE, but I was on the national board then. And I was on the membership committee, and I remember that there was one of the other board members, and this was a wealthy guy. In fact, you ever hear of Miracle Ear, the hearing aid company? He was one of the owners of it. So he was very well off, and he was very into doing fundraising, and in particular trying to figure out ways to help fundraising for the ARE. I was, well, I'll call it 30 years old at the time, and I was still working my way through a prosperity consciousness at that point. And I remember being on the membership committee, and this guy, his name was Rudy, and he came in to the membership committee to see if he could sell the idea of what he called the Golden Circle Club. Golden Circle Club. And what that was if you give a certain amount of money, you became a member of this Golden Circle Club, which meant that you were able to have an annual dinner with, at the time, Charles Thomas Cayce, who recently passed away, but at the time you would have an annual dinner in which only the Golden Circle members would be with him, and you would get, a lifetime membership, and I don't even remember what the dollar amount of money, was that was involved, but it was substantial, call it $5,000 or something like that, to be a member of this. And so I was listening to it and to his presentation, and I said, "Why do you think this is necessary?" I said, "Why is this going to work?" was actually my question. Why, if we ask them for money, if you have this Golden Circle Club that you become a member of, why is that going to work better as a fundraiser for the ARE, other than saying we have all of these needs for money to be able to be of greater service to our membership and others out there? Why is your method going to be better than just a general appeal? And of course his answer was pretty straightforward, and it was the one I expected. He goes, people want to be recognized for what they give, and they want to be able to have special treatment and they want to be able to, and if they can buy, they're used to being able to buy their way into a fancier club instead of just going to the, the rank and file health club out there. You get the one with the plush robe and the towels and the, marble statues when you walk into the health club kind of thing. And he goes, those people will give a lot more money if you offer this out there. And I just came back and said, and if we are throwing that kind of a vibration out there as far as trying to attract that money, is that going to be money that will help us out, or is it going to have a different kind of vibration to it as we attract it that isn't going to make it as successful as the money that says, God bless you, I really want this work to continue, and I don't need to be a member of the Golden Circle Club to give you the $5,000. I would really rather have that $5,000. Richard Mraz says it a wonderful way in the Vision 2020. He goes, we need, I don't know what it is, $4 million. And he goes, now, if we had one man come up and give, or woman, and give us $4 million, he goes, that would be great. But wouldn't it be better if everybody gave what they could, and in a group effort, we built this ministry from the ground up by everybody's participation in it? What a wonderful way to be able to look at prosperity, at fundraising, and everything else. Now, he came back, I couldn't believe he said this to me in an ARE meeting. I lived in Anaheim, California, just 20, 30 minutes from the coast, or from the shore, and he goes, well, I would expect that kind of a statement from somebody that lives on the wrong side of the San Andreas Fault. Now, remembering that Edgar Cayce, I share that story now because Rudy passed away a long time ago. He's probably laughing on the other side of it now in the Life Review, looking at it going, oh my gosh, I did say that. But understand in the Cayce readings in the world in Earth Changes, he actually said that if Vesuvius or Mount Pelée were to erupt, that within 90 days, that California will experience great inundation. So everybody's just panicked about living in California, and here I am, dumb enough to live on the wrong side of the San Andreas Fault. He thought I was nuts to begin with. Of course I wasn't going to agree with his fundraising ideas. Then, let's flash forward 25 years later. And I was approached by the ARE to be able to donate good chunks of money to be able to fund the remodel of the headquarters. I don't know if you know it, but they have done a beautiful job of remodeling that entire old hospital building in Virginia Beach over there, and now they're working on the library. And it required, I don't know, $7 million or something like that. I didn't give them that. But, they were doing a fundraising, and there were two things. One is that you could buy a brick. And in the entryway there, they have all of these, and in fact, we have a very similar thing down here in the courtyard where you see the names engraved and all that. And so you could buy a brick, in which I did that for my mother, in memory of Helen Marie Schroeder, my mother, who introduced me to all this Edgar Cayce stuff. And so I did that, and they were kind enough. If you were to go there, it is, in fact, Cher from our study group said that she went over there recently and saw it. You walk up the steps, and hers is the first one, right there in front of everything. So, I mean, they really honored her well. But then I had Pat Belisle, who is the Director of Development. He calls me up and he goes, we are putting together, they just had a poster that had all the people that had donated on there. And he goes, well, I didn't really ask you about putting your name on the poster because I knew that was going to be temporary. He goes, but do you want to have your name on there in the permanent thing that goes on the wall? My knee-jerk reaction was to say, oh my gosh, that's not necessary. And then I thought, just a minute, and I just breathed in real quick, tried to make that connection with the divine and said, is this something I want to do or don't want to do? And I suddenly got, you want to have your name on there. I said, why? And I got very clearly that there is going to be a time in a future incarnation that I will see it. And I will make a connection with seeing that up there and recognizing that I have been supporting this for many, 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 not only generations when Cayce was alive, but going back to Rata. I mean, going back to previous lifetimes. This is not just a commitment that all of us make. It says, this lifetime, this is what I do. It's not like the PTA or, the Red Cross or the March of Dimes, that you go out there and join up with a nonprofit. This is why we're here on Earth. And for me, I got in touch with the fact of this is going to be very important to me as an individual down the road. I don't care who knows I'm in that club. I don't care who knows what money I donated. It's very important to me for me to make that connection with this lifetime and lifetimes in the past of which I've really been a supporter of what it is that the ARE is all about. And so when you're taking a look at this, you can say, I'm actually willing to become a member of the Golden Circle Club now, but it's for a very different reason than what Rudy was talking about way back there in 1980, whatever it was, and what it is today. Now, I'll give you one other that was so fascinating. Somebody asked Edgar Cayce in a reading one time, what lays beyond this solar system? I mean, when we progress to the point where we're able to move on from here and we don't sit at the cool table in the insane asylum anymore, what lies out there beyond that? And Cayce's answer to that particular person was, you're asking out of curiosity and you have way too much to deal with now. We're not going to give you that information. Pretty much the same question was asked later on by another person, and he answered it. Now, isn't that just what I'm talking about right here? If you approach this thing from the Golden Circle Club idea, it says, I want to be able to be a member of this club and shown recognition and treated differently and having, perks and all of that. You don't get the question answered. You don't get the perks off of that thing. But if you had a sincere seeker that asked the question, he starts saying what happens. And by the way, the answer to that was, we will have the opportunity to become as saviors to other systems of entrapment, just like Jesus was to us here on the earth, if we choose to do so. So after we pulled all those pieces away and have a perfect statue that remains, we also become the way, the truth, and the life to other people, because we, like Jesus, went out there, fell, and figured out how to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. And just like an AA mentor, we're able to be an AA mentor to other people who have made selfish choices and need to quit thinking that it's just enough to be able to sit at the cool table of the insane asylum of whatever realm they're in. So that was the answer they had to do with that. All things definitely work to good eventually in how we go about this. Rudy, myself, my mother, all of us here are all going to have our pluses and minuses of how we learn this stuff. Spending time in the presence of Jesus is a non-negotiable. Don't wait until you have time to do it. Make time. I remember, it's another one. Christine Kane is from Australia, quite an activist for women's rights and definitely a spiritual and motivational speaker. The one thing that I have to say, whenever you're talking about, I'll give you the anecdote with Hugh Cayce. I remember Hugh Cayce, and that was Edgar Cayce's oldest son, was at the end of every one of his lectures, back when he would just travel the nation over and over again, he would put such an effort into the study group work. He goes, believe me, it's not just enough to study these readings. Getting into this Cayce work that we do like on Monday and Wednesday nights here in the room next door from 7 to 9, he said being able to apply this kind of information in our lives, discussing it with other people, figuring out how to make better choices than the ones we have made in the past. He goes, this is the application that he's talking about. And you learn about prayer and meditation in there, as well as the application. And a woman asked a question in the audience, and he was always so diplomatic, but boy, listen to this answer. She goes, I just find that I'm so busy with the kids and making dinner and laundry and all these other things that we have to do. I just don't have time to be able to go out there and, and join a study group. And Hewlin looked at her and he just kind of smiled and he goes, so what again do you have time to do that's more important than that? And that's all he said. The room was dead silent afterward, but you're going, if we are not here to go to our jobs. We are not here to do our laundry, to wash the dishes, to mow the yard, to wake up and go to work and come home and watch TV or whatever it is. We are here to be able to manifest the unconditional love of God in every choice that we make. What else do we have time to do that's more important than that? If we can't carve a couple of hours out, and God bless you because you folks are here, but how many empty seats do we have of people who aren't here who had to do their laundry and dishes and get the kids to bed or whatever it is? There's just a real, as it says right here. It's non-negotiable. We need to be able to spend time in Jesus' presence, and you do that by hanging out with the right people and through prayer, meditation, and application. One more, and we're going to take a break. As to the application of that gained, and in the parentheses there is my, so I didn't have the big long, there's a big long question that went with this, from living in His presence. So it's talking about how do we apply that which we've gained when it has to do within His presence. So as to the application of that gained, each must answer that for themselves. This is where it gets really interesting. And in fact, I'll tell you, my ultimate society, if you will, I'm very much a liberal moralist, but I'm a fiscal conservative. That kind of makes me neither a Republican or a Democrat, because I know my beliefs upset everybody. So what happens when I look at something like this is that you wind up saying that you have to go according to what it is that brings joy to your heart. Now, there are an infinite number of perfect answers. If you come up to a choice, and I'm going to show you visually what it's like to make right and wrong choices and what it looks like in life, at the end of this, after the break, I'll come back to that. But we have all this infinite number of choices to make out there, and the chances are that each one of us is going to make a different decision from the other when faced with the same circumstances. Now, I can say that there's an old adage that says people who are equally informed rarely disagree. People equally informed rarely disagree. If we were all raised the same way, and we had the same values, and we've had the same background, and all those things match up, tendencies are, it's not that it's going to be 100%, but tendencies are we would all tend to make the same decision if we're equally informed in all those respects. But if we're not, each must answer for themselves. So whether you wind up being a guy that teaches you how to become a millionaire in commodities like Steve does, or Alvin was out there doing all the electrical stuff. I was an entrepreneur, a mortgage broker. My wife was a registrar for a college. All of these things are a different path going to the same thing, like all the religions. Here's all the religions and trying to make you better, and they're all trying to lead you to the way, the truth, and the light, and who live and move and have our very being. So what happens when you answer to yourself and go in the direction that you want? What does it look like at the end of your life when you come up to this life review that I talked about earlier? A number of you have heard me talk about this book before from Dr. George Ritchie, a medical doctor who had a near-death experience. In fact, one of the first ones I've ever heard recorded, because it was back in World War II. And he was clinically dead, as far as putting the stopwatch on him, for 19 minutes. Because they said, he's dead, put him into the morgue. 19 minutes later, somebody saw him move. And so that was that during that period of time, he wrote a book on the experiences that he had there, and it was very similar to what other people describe as a life review. He had this presence, and he recognized it only later that it was the Christ consciousness that was going through every single aspect of his life. He was only 19 years old at the time. He said, so it wasn't as long as it could have been. But he was able, he says, you can't imagine what it's like to sit there and see every choice that you've ever made. And he goes, you get to see that choice from your own perspective, remind you of how you saw it. You get to see it from the perspective of the other people on the other side of this that were affected by it. And he goes, but it doesn't stop there, because then what you are blessed with is getting to see the reality of what it really was. It wasn't with the bias of you or their perspective, because these are people who are not equally informed, so they're of course not going to agree on everything, but you get to see it for what it really was, what actually happened, and what the better answer would have been, not only for you, but if you were on the receiving end, how you could have reacted better to it if they didn't. All right, so it said the life review is showing us every second of our lives and how we could have chosen better. And by the way, he said it is not painful as you would think to see all the bad choices that we've made in our lives. Said, ooh, I shouldn't have, stolen that candy bar when I was a kid, or I shouldn't have, gossiped, or I shouldn't have said this bad thing, or made that bad choice, or whatever. But what he said, the thing that hurts the most is seeing what opportunities were available to us out there that we did not take advantage of. It was just sitting there. It's like, here's God and Jesus just handing this golden opportunity that could have changed your life and everybody you came in contact with. And he went, no thanks. I don't need that. He goes, that hurts. That is truly the painful thing in terms of the life review. And he goes, if people are afraid of death, it's probably that. Because they remember somewhere in the deep, dark recesses of their mind, oh, I got to go look at all those missed opportunities again. And apparently it's not a lot of fun to be able to go through that. But it does allow us to learn how we can become more loving, patient, and cooperative. And it does it in such a way that that presence next to him never condemned him. He said, back off. It was constantly being encouraged. Don't worry about this. This is for you to learn. We're not trying to punish you for anything. Don't feel bad about this. Go forth and sin no more. Do better the next time with every choice that you have. Just make the more loving choice on the next one and you've got it made.
So, one of the things that I've found is that life becomes a lot easier when you make yourself cognizantly aware that you are working and walking in His presence. Things become a lot more automatic. John alluded to, I teach people. I'm an instructor for a very complex subject, right? And I also do these. I know that in and of myself, I cannot do this by myself. I'm often reminded of when I'd go into Dr. Peter Shoeb's office. And when you'd walk into Peter's office, as soon as you walked in, on the right-hand side was a picture of Jesus. And we had the conversation because in between putting things back in place, okay, we spent a lot of time talking about the Cayce readings. And one of the things he told me, he goes, I couldn't do this without him. I said, I understand, because I have things that I do that I couldn't do without him. And every day, it's part of my morning prayers that I force myself, I don't force myself, but I make it part of my habit to put myself and ask that my will be His will. Or I should say, His will be my will, that I would do what He would want me to do, so that I can go with Him. And before I get on stage at any time, I'm always asking for Him to channel to me His love, His words, His deeds, so that I can present what He wants presented in the manner that would be understandable to the audience. Because I cannot do this by myself. I don't have the capacity. I need help. And I ain't ashamed to ask for it. Okay? And that's what John was talking about. You've got to go with it. And that's part of my routine. I've made it part of my routine because I've found that, you know what, hell of a lot easier when He's on board than when you're trying to do it yourself. Because the ego is not your amigo. Trust me. So, with that, we will pick up the second part here so Stephanie can get her beauty rest and John will sing lullabies.
I don't know if you guys had a chance to read the slide right there. I was a little surprised when I found this some time back because I had always heard that Albert Einstein was an atheist, or at least agnostic, as to, didn't really have an opinion that God was out there in terms of how any of the religions described or thought of Him. But what a depth of understanding he shows in this for somebody who is allegedly atheist or agnostic. As a child, I received instruction both in the Bible and in the Talmud. I am a Jew, but I am enthralled by the luminous figure of the Nazarene. No one can read the Gospels without feeling the actual presence of Jesus. His personality pulsates in every word. No myth is filled with such life. This is somebody who studied the Bible more than most. And I don't think somebody who is an atheist or agnostic would be able to describe Jesus to the depth that this thing does without having some real thoughts and admiration for everything that Jesus had to say and the way that He has incorporated it into His life. Back on to the 262 readings again. This has so many caveats to it that I find it fascinating, because what the question had to do is said, how do we know what when we're talking about God and when we're talking about Jesus? And Cayce was pretty clear on, remember when Jesus said that those who have seen me have seen the Father? He wasn't kidding. So you can talk about one or the other. So you're talking about God, Jesus, Christ consciousness. You can just say yes. You've got it. That's it. Every one of them is going to do, you know, the right and loving thing as far as if you're going to them for answers. But this is fascinating in being able to discern or interpret all of the things that are talking about it. Him refers to the Father, he to the Son. So when you go back and you look at all of these different quotes, it gives an entirely different perspective of the Cayce readings to understand it's talking about God when it says him, and he when it's talking about Jesus. That's interesting because this becomes whom, and that becomes who. In whom we live and move and have our very being, in God. We don't live and move and have our very being within Jesus. Jesus is part of that who lives and has his very being within God as we all do. So that's the whom on the end, and that's the who when we're talking about the Son. It is generally understood by the critics or those that would prefer good English. Him is rather inclusive, while he is definite, or the one Son. The interesting thing about this is that he's not trying to, he's changing the rules of grammar. In fact, Cayce was really good at that. If you ever read his, he'd always use the word see at the end of when he's trying to make sure that people were following or going along with it. He would use words like builded, which is not incorrect grammar, but it's archaic. People don't say, I builded something. You don't do that unless, well, maybe if you're from Bama. But, something along those lines. He would always, in glory, does not get defined in Webster's as the ability to serve. There is a little bit of civil disobedience in Cayce in the way that he describes things. And one, in fact, I think it was just last month when Steve was doing the talk, I don't know if you actually put the quote up there, I think you did, in which it said, live your life so that you can tell the other person to go to hell and have it not be a sin. Wow. And the point being, it's not that Cayce is recommending that you tell people to go to hell. It's just saying you can literally say, you whited sepulchres with the unclean men's bones, looking beautiful without the unclean men's bones within. When Jesus was saying things like that, Cayce is indicating you can go out there and call a spade if you're not condemning them, if you're just going out there and trying to make a point out of the whole thing, and you don't have any malice, condemnation in your heart toward the other person. That's telling them to go to hell, and it's not a sin if you're really being instructed through what you're doing. You can even overturn the money changers' tables if you don't feel bad about everything that you're thinking inside, and you're saying, this is the best way I can get the message across to the other people. So Cayce was a real fan of civil disobedience, as was Jesus. Wasn't Jesus doing nothing but civil disobedience? He'd go out there and say, I'm going to heal you on the Sabbath. I'm not supposed to, but I'm going to do it anyway, because isn't that what we're here to do? I mean, aren't we here to be able to have the ability to serve, to glorify ourselves through service and God at the same time? Let me do a little preface before Steve gets up there. I was just saying before in the first half of this that I was going to have everybody feeling better about our political situation. And if there's one question that I get more often in doing these talks, especially in this time of elections and all of that, is, and if we get the elected officials that we deserve, out there, what does that have to say for where we are right now? I want to give you an entirely different frame of reference to be able to view what we're going through. Is this that we are going to wind up with, the pot or the kettle, so to speak, as far as in who we would elect to be president? I would invite an entirely different way of being able to look at this, and that is going to be demonstrated in this video for a moment. I'm going to give you, first of all, in fact, I just got an email from Mark Thurston the other day, and he had this dream. actually is a dream about me and my mother, but it was a dream that he had passed along from a long time ago that I want to relate to you now. He was flying in an airplane in the dream, and he was panicked because as he's sitting there trying to pull back on the wheel to be able to make the plane go up, he was just at the very tip top of the trees, and so he's sitting there just skimming along in the tops of the trees, and he's doing everything he can to pull the stick back, and he feels like he's going to crash at any moment, and just when he can't take it anymore, suddenly the plane crests the mountain. He didn't realize that he was climbing a mountain during that whole time. He's just staying right there with the trees, and then the trees drop off, and he realizes, this is how far I have soared. And all this time I'm thinking I'm just getting ready to crash, but I was doing this the whole time. And because of what I was using as my ability, measurement was how am I just barely staying away from the alligators nipping at me as I'm going by? He goes, I didn't recognize how much growth was actually going on until I crested that particular mountain. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't other mountains to get to. What I want to suggest is that that's where we are right now. We're feeling like these alligators are nipping at us and our toes are just barely staying above them. We're just barely able to stay over the trees, but there is a great deal of growth that is going on in this country. I don't know if you ever hear these statistics. Do you know that we're safer now per capita than we have been in 50 years? There is less crime, violent crime per capita going on right now than there has. It is hard to believe. I think it has an awful lot more media coverage than it used to have. Yeah, CNN was a double-edged sword when they came on and did 24/7 reporting of everything. But the whole point of what this video is going to show is exactly, I'm going to describe it first, and we'll get to watch it on the screen there. What you're going to see is this plastic water bottle right here is going to get put into not just a regular freezer. This thing is going to go down below 0 Fahrenheit. So it's going to go below 0 with the water, and you're going to watch the bottle come out, and it's still water. It's not an ice cube inside. But it's sitting there with water. All of the conditions are perfect. And it's going to go think like that, and you're going to watch it all turn into ice almost instantaneously. It's going to go poof, and it's ice, just like that. And the point being is, I think we are at a point where we're going up and we're getting close to being able to crest that mountain. We have all of the conditions in place for a tremendous consciousness change that will manifest so everybody sees it here on the earth. And believe me, it's going to take something like having Trump and Clinton running for president where everybody goes, oh, please, hold on a minute. We have got to do something different than we've been doing up to this point in order to be able to manifest God's unconditional earth. You can't love on the earth. You can't build a 50-foot wall, and you can't just go ahead and do all the other stuff that everybody complains about, saying that this is unconditional love being personified here on the earth. You can't do that. And that's what we all want to go for, and we're finally going to say enough. And I think those conditions are coming in place right now. Go ahead and run the video, Steve.
Bottles, and they've never been opened, so the water is extremely pure. Now the secret to instant ice is just about as simple as placing your bottles in the freezer. I let these ones sit for 2 hours and 45 minutes exactly. And here you can see the water is still liquid, but it's actually cooled down to a temperature well below freezing. All it takes from this point is a sharp jolt to the bottle, and you can see the water flash freezes to ice right in the palm of your hand. How cool is that? You can also start the reaction by using an ice crystal like one of these ice cubes. Just carefully remove the cap from the bottle and pour the water directly onto the ice. The water immediately begins to crystallize, giving you the power to create your own instant ice sculptures. The end result is a slush that has the consistency of a watery snowball, which of course is 100% edible and refreshingly delicious. Now try pouring your super cooled water into a clean glass and drop a bit of ice right in the center. You'll see the ice crystal begins to grow until it fills the glass completely. That's perfectly chilled for a hot summer's day. Alright, let's finish up by dipping just the tip of an ice cube in to see what happens. Within a couple of seconds, it's frozen in place and the entire cup is solid.
Well, what's happening is that all of the conditions are right for the water to turn into ice. Now, we know that that happens at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, but What's happening is it doesn't, it's almost like surface tension of the water. You ever fill a glass of water to the top, and you can actually get the water with the surface tension to go a little bit over the top of the lid without spilling? This is very similar to that. You get the conditions exactly right in what you said. This can turn to ice, but it needs a catalyst. And the catalyst is whether it's the finger going in, thumping the side of the bottle, whether it's putting the ice cube in it, whether it's the kinetic energy of the water hitting the ice cold water hitting the ice and then forming into ice itself. What's happening is it needs a catalyst in order to fulfill its physics function of becoming ice, as it's supposed to. When that's what I'm saying is happening in the earth right now. All of the conditions are right for us to really start manifesting unconditional love as we never have before. And what is the catalyst for doing that? Enough. I don't want what we have out there anymore. Politics is not the answer. If it was, Jesus would have ran for office. Jesus would have been Caesar. Jesus knew not to be Caesar. He goes, render unto Caesar, and I'm going to stand over here and be the way, the truth, and the light. And if you like what I'm doing, pick up your cross and follow me. I'm not going to legislate morality any longer. I'm going to show you what works for me. And if you like what's happening in my life and what I have to say and the way I treat other people and how life unfolds when you do that, then come this way. Otherwise, you've got other choices out there, and God bless you if you want to try them. And we all do. I know I have. All right. The way may be heavy, and his presence as of shadows. Yet the shadows are only of thine own misunderstandings. So the point is, in this particular reading, especially as you go on and catch the end of it, it feels when we go out there and we try to be able to live a life of unconditional love, people think we're crazy. You turn the other cheek, you forgive, you go on and don't join in the condemnation of another person, no matter how badly they screw up. I catch a lot of flack for not talking as badly about Hitler as maybe he deserves. But I'm going, that is an unconditionally loved child of God out there who eventually is actually going to make the right choices. I mean, how many trillions of years might it take? I don't know. It's not for us to say. But to say that man has to die, that soul has to, die horrible deaths and all of the rest of that, and good, if you rejoice in the iniquity, as the Bible says, we're not supposed to do that. And so you have to think in terms of unconditional love for everybody that's out there, and we're really not catching everybody at their best. With the living of, now again, the capital letters mean with the living of that given, all will come to the knowledge, to the understanding of, we are in his presence, whether we acknowledge it in the present or not. For as has been given, it is in him we live and move and have our being. Steve said it well in the very beginning of this whole thing of we are always in his presence. If this is God, and the sun, if we're like the planets around the sun and we turn around and look in the other direction and don't see God anymore, are we no longer in his presence? Or are we just not recognizing that we're in his presence? I don't know if you folks know this about astrology. Did you know that this is a fascinating thing about it. And I really just started learning this as I was studying astrology and in the Cayce readings. I don't know if you saw that we had we're going to start offering astrology and numerology readings come October for everybody. But I started seeing how astrology works. Everybody understands that you have the sun in the middle and you have our planets that go around it. And out there are the constellations that are, like I'm a Virgo, my wife's Sagittarius, you have Gemini and Aquarius and all the other signs. So you have the 12 signs, which are the star patterns that go around. So here's the Earth, here's the sun, and so do you think when the Earth goes into Virgo, for where we are right now, so here's the sun, here's the Earth, do you think Virgo's over here? And the answer is no, it's the exact opposite. Virgo, you enter the house of Virgo when the Earth looking through the sun is directly in line with the house of Virgo on the other side of the sun. In other words, you have to see through the light in order to get the truth of astrology. It's actually the opposite of what we would think, that, you know, you just go from the sun to the earth and you're in the house right there. It's the other way. You look directly toward the sun and it's this constellation on the other side of it. I just think that's interesting to see the way that sort of thing unfolds, to be able to say you have to face the light, go toward the light in order to be able to see the truths that are revealed there. So how is it that if we are all in His presence, whether we acknowledge it or not, and we live and move and have our being, how do we wind up getting there? And I'll say, again, this is just reiterating, it's through prayer, meditation, and application. But the best analogy I can come up with for this is riding a bicycle. We've all had to go through that. And it seems like, how in the world do you ride a bicycle? You know, you're trying to be balanced, and oh my gosh, you fall over, you get hurt, and all of that stuff. But the moment that you learn how to ride a bike, you continue to know how to ride a bike for the rest of your life. Why is that? Because it's a part of who we are. We have been, I mean, just like, and the reason I'm drawing this analogy is because we recognize that if we were created perfect, we've already learned to ride the bike. Now we just have to get back on it and make sure that we follow all the rules as we have before and be able to go forth and sin no more. So I just want to make clear that as we're talking about living in His presence and living as we believe, that we really are not we have not forgotten how to be more loving, and we desire to be more loving. It's a vicious cycle in the correct direction, no question about it. Now this number right here indicates that the person who is known as 413, because they had readings of their own and they remain anonymous through those numbers, instead of it saying Mr. Smith right here, it just says 413, is asking the following question. This one's, wow, I can't even believe he was in the study group, but let's go ahead and take a look. Have I applied the past lessons sufficiently to entitle me to a place in His presence? I'm like, you remember that woman that said, oh, Jesus, can my sons be at your left and right hand at the throne of God? I don't know if you remember that story in the Bible or not. It's like, each should recognize that heritage, that all are entitled to a place in His presence. I mean, it's so easy to wind up, especially within religions, and I'll just pick Catholics out of the air and say, okay, well, you have saints and you have angels and you have popes and bishops and cardinals and all the hierarchy of stuff that's out there, and it's just so clear in the answer. Each should recognize that heritage, that all are entitled to a place in His presence. There isn't somebody that sits at God's right hand and left hand. God doesn't have hands, actually. I know that's counter to the Sistine Chapel and what Michelangelo put out there. For He wills that none should perish, but all should come to the acceptable understanding of His Spirit, bearing witness with thy spirit. So when I see this, I'm going, is He looking for a pat on the back? Is He trying to say, I have measured up? Am I sitting at the cool table at the insane asylum? I mean, all of these things seem to be in the direction of going, how in the world do you have somebody in group one who is asking a question along those lines? But I love the answer. The answer is not nearly as condemning as I just was in terms of being able to go back and straighten out the truth. What's interesting, and you heard me talk of the line down there at the bottom of getting into heaven, leaning on the arm of someone we've helped. And we tend to start thinking of, like a group like this, it's interested in the Cayce material and a God of unconditional love and being able to make loving choices in our life. I want to share with you the way that some of these things work out. One of the greatest blessings and greatest challenges of my life was a person that really helped me to get a hold of a prosperity consciousness. It actually started out being a landlord of mine in this no alcohol teen nightclub business Stephanie and I had back in the 80s. And he called me up after I moved out here to Arizona. He called me up to go help him with a business back in California again. And I wasn't particularly interested in doing that, but he finally talked me into it. He said, you have an unlimited budget. to be able to help me turn this problem around. It was a shopping center, bottom line. And I did. I went in there, gave him my all, and we turned that thing around, and it's blowing and going today. 100% full, makes a ton of money for the guy. And the interesting thing is that I asked in a reading, not a Cayce reading, but a reading from Amperior, I'd asked about the relationship with this gentleman. Because he was an atheist. He was Jewish, but he was an atheist. He was an atheist because of the Holocaust. And his parents could not accept that God exists and the Jews went through what they did in the Holocaust. And they go, all right, we're Jewish, and we certainly have that ethnic background, but we don't believe in God. And that was the way he was raised. So he did not believe in God. I didn't share any kind of a spiritual, foundation with him whatsoever. And frankly, he didn't have a spiritual foundation. I mean, the choices that he made were very much about, how do I make more money? How do I maintain control over a situation? Those were the things that guided his life. And so in getting the reading, and I said, what are my past life influences with this individual? And how does that affect, what's going on with us today? And the answer was fascinating. He said, you two have an interesting contract. That wasn't the word, but it's like an agreement. And that is, one of you will always precede the others in the lifetimes in which you would coexist on the planet at the same time. One of you will precede the others and smooth the way for your prosperity. So in other words, he came in this, he's worth a couple of $100 million. And when he came in, I was having, I was still struggling with the concepts of prosperity and all that. And the next thing I know, I go in there and I just became, being in his presence, I wound up just understanding prosperity and money and how to make things work better than I ever had. I can call it faith, I can call it confidence, it's a combination of both of those things. But once I did that and turned that place around from bankruptcy, within 18 months it's 100% full, I'm going, I got this. And it isn't just me, John Schroeder has it. I have the concepts of prosperity going through me, in which I never had to worry about money again after that time. But that man also didn't want me to come back to my spiritual home in Arizona, because I go, all right, it's all working well. I don't want to stay here anymore. I want to go back to my spiritual home. And he goes, uh-oh, not going to let that happen, and I'm going to make that very painful for you. He's not saying it that way, but he didn't want me to leave. And so he did everything. You know that thing back when kids are in grade school or junior high or whatever, and they hurt the one that they like, that sort of thing. It turned into that, in which he was, I'm going to try to make you stay. And at first he just kept offering me more and more money. I said, thank you, I'm still leaving. Thank you, I'm still leaving. And it didn't work. And then it turned to the other side, and it became a real challenge for me to maintain a loving outlook with this individual, even though he was doing all these awful things to me. I was still saying, God bless you, I know what's driving you to do this. And so it really was a challenge to be able to do that. But here we are, each and every life, paving the way for the other one with prosperity, and always winding up in opposition at some point because of our spiritual background differences. We were always going to have a different motivation for why we were involved in the same project, and that was inevitably going to become a conflict every time. But it also brought prosperity to, in a symbiotic way in those things. So I just wanted to show you how you can have a yin and a yang, if you will, even in situations where we don't share a spiritual foundation at all. And talking about what we see in the mirror, when he says, for as in the water, the face answereth the face. It's talking about, so what we see, the reflection that we see, goes down to the underlying part. Not in that of long-faced or in mourning or in sorrow, but in gladness of purpose, of service, worshipfulness in him. The interesting thing about this particular reading, if you relate it to another one, and a lot of people have a problem with this, Cayce talks about when Jesus had been, arrested in Gethsemane and then put on trial and then whipped and crown of thorns, and he's carrying the cross along, and says, Jesus laughed and joked on his way to Mount Calvary. He laughed and joked. So the picture that we get from Cecil B. DeMille, the greatest story ever told, and he's just he can't endure this thing as he's carrying this cross. And the answer is, no, he was actually laughing and joking because, and the readings go on to say this, he knew he had almost accomplished what he came to do, to be the way, the truth, and the life. right there he was able to accomplish it, and there's this part of it that the Roman soldiers had to realize that it didn't matter what had happened to him, and it wasn't just Romans. Remember, you had Sadducees and Pharisees right there, that, you know, had said, okay, we got him now, we got him condemned to death, he's going to be crucified, and they're going, you still don't have control over me. You thinking I've changed my mind and that I'm going to do everything differently? No. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And so in laughing and joking, if you will, on the way to Mount Calvary, he is making the point very clear, you can do all this stuff to me, and I will still wind up forgiving you, not just to go nah, 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 but to show you this is what happens when you live a life of unconditional love. I had very early on, I was probably, I don't know, 13, 14 years old, and I had an experience that just terrorized me at the time, and I wound up having to go through a process of being able to go through, do I live as I believe? You know, where it's one thing to say, I believe this stuff, but do I wind up living it through the other way? Actually, Stephanie was one, my father died within the first year she and I got together. She said one of the things that really cemented her faith in our belief in the Cayce material was the way she saw our family react to my father's passing. There was certainly tears, certainly sadness, but at the same time there were happy memories, and you could tell that all of us absolutely believed that he was still around. All right? So that he was still with us. He's a soul, invulnerable. He's an eternal being, and it was so clear how much all of us believed that. And it really made a difference to her. And that's that thing that you're talking about. Live your life so that it manifests that which you believe. Well, when I was about 13 or 14, I remember I visited a friend of mine's house, and we were going to this bowling alley that was across a major street from where it was. And to get there, just being teenagers as we were, you can hop over the wall of this backyard, which actually went to a parking lot of a little motel. It was back there, called the Space Age Lodge. I remember it well. So it's right across in this bowling alley that we were going to, and we jump over the wall, and here's 4 or 5 of our, not real good friends, but, you know, you go to school with each other, so we knew who they were. And we go walking by, and they're just being teenagers, and they've taken a whole great big, you know, box of books of matches, and they're lighting the books, you know, a book of matches and throwing them at each other in the little sidewalk area of this motel thing. And we're just walking by and say, how you guys doing? And we just go by and we just ignore them. Well, the next thing you know, you hear, hey, you bees, get out of here, you know, and you hear this guy all upset, and we're like, oh, and they all scatter, and we just continue to walk onto the bowling alley because we have nothing to do with them. The next thing we know, we get tackled, and I mean tackled. We're just walking along. We have these big guys who are in their 20s or something, and they just body slam us to the ground, and they hold us there until the police department comes, puts us in handcuffs, takes us down to the police station. Oh, but I'm getting ahead of myself. As we're being held down right there, and the cops show up, and we're still being held down, then they take us back to the scene of the crime, in which you can actually see the charcoal marks of which they've kicked all these books of matches into a pile like this and put it under the corner of the building, making it look like we might have tried to set the building on fire. And I'm looking at that, I go, you know, and both the other guy's name was Walter, a friend of mine, and so we're going, they just kicked all that stuff together to make it look. I said, that wasn't what was going on. Those other guys were lighting books of matches, throwing them at each other. It was, you know, a harmless kid prank, wasn't it? And then they take us around the corner, and the cops are, okay, well, what happened? And we tell them, and then they switch cops, and he goes, well, your friend just told us what you did. You know, how the cops do. And they said, and I just looked at it and said, no, he didn't. You know, when you know the truth, I said, there is no way he sat there and did that. I mean, he and I were buddies. We knew what happened. And so the cops were absolutely certain that we had not tried to set that building on fire. That did not stop them from putting us in handcuffs, throwing us in the back of the vehicle, and taking us down to the police station to call our parents. And they didn't file any charges. We just went home. But how awful does it feel to be treated like that? I am a felon at that point. I'm a teenager. I'm going, my life is over. I have tried. They're thinking I lit this building on fire, and the cops aren't telling us anything. They've hooked us up and taken us down. I'm thinking I'm going to juvenile hall, and I had nothing to do with this. And then finally, when I get home and I figured this whole thing out, okay, now I got it. But then, how much anger was I going to hold on? Okay, the kids were kids, and they were teenagers, and they just did what they did. I wasn't quite so angry at them as I was, why did the cops do that to us? Why didn't they just release us? And then I'm thinking, because those hotel people were so ticked off at the wrong people, and we happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, that if the cops didn't take us away, they were going to make a big political to-do out of this whole thing of, these people try to light our building on fire and you just let them go home? Oh, no, that's not going to happen. So it's so much easier to just hook the teenagers up, take them down to the police station, and that's that. But frankly, I was so worked up over the thing until I looked at it from the perspective that I'm giving you right here, I could not forgive them. I was thinking, you know what, if I would have been, like a particular race or religion or something like that, I would have said, I'm being persecuted against. It's hard to have blonde hair. I used to be blonde. It's hard to have blonde hair and blue eyes and wind up saying you're being discriminated against in America. But that's exactly, I was being discriminated against for being a teenager at that particular point, and it was just easier to treat me that way than it was to actually treat me with the respect that was really deserved right there. So why do you think we weren't running? We didn't do anything wrong. If I'd done something wrong, I'd be out of there with all the rest of them. It didn't matter. All right, so the fact is until I recognized, but the point was is as soon as I got a hold of it and I said, God bless them all, and I just let it go at that point, and the gratification was immediate. It was immediate, and I was able to go, and that was the end of it. And so I didn't have to wind up having the pent-up emotion with that one that I really could have carried forward, being traumatized from that point on, thinking, everybody's against me in the police department and this and that, or whatever. Okay, I think I got one more and then wrapping it up. In His presence that we see reflected in the mirror of life shows what manner of shadows are cast. So in other words, you saw it in another one, that we create the shadows in our life. So that when I was talking about that we turn away from the sun and all we see are the shadows behind us, shadows like that shadows being created by me getting in blocking the light and being able to come through. Should I make some? So you wind up having that kind of a situation in which you create your own problems out there. And the question is is there going to be a time where we don't wind up having shadows in our life or negative things happening? If we are living a life of unconditional love, does nothing bad ever happen to us? Well, how about that we have God manifest Christ's consciousness in the earth through Jesus? Did anything bad ever happen to Jesus? Oh, yeah. Not a lot of good stuff happened to him, especially toward the end of his life right there. There was a lot of stuff that went wrong. But you can wind up saying that it's, that our measure of spiritual development, according to the Cayce readings, is our level of patience. What is our level of patience? How much unconditional love and patience do we manifest when things start to go wrong in our life? And eventually you'll wind up saying, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Now, Jesus may not want us to have to measure up to that standard until we actually attain the Christ consciousness. But up until then, we wind up doing the best we can with what we have. And then even with the mistakes we make, we go forth and sin no more. We have a maze here. And what I'm going to do is show you how life works when it talks about loving and unloving choices on this. And I have to do it quickly. Imagine that this is the infinite number of possibilities that could ever happen in our life right now being demonstrated through this maze. And let's say that I draw a line right here down the middle, and I say, these are the loving choices that we can make in life, and these are the selfish choices that we can make in life. And then I go to this one, and I say, how about when we made our first sin, which is just under that loving to the loving side, the unloving side, and said, we went to the unloving side right here, and we started getting worse and a little better and worse and better and worse, and we went all the way down here, and then we have this revelation in which we actually start to make loving choices out there, and then we slip back down in again, and then all of a sudden we get back into the loving side and we go up here. Now, what happens is that you ever see those, did you do this? You go in this direction, or no, if it's a no, you go in that direction. They're called logic trees. And so here you are, and you go, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. Every time there's a turn on here, it's somebody making a decision saying I either am going to make it more loving or less loving, or maybe just a break-even choice as far as what happens right there. And so what happens when we actually get to the point? I don't know if you remember this in the Bible, but it says God will strike from his book of remembrance the things that we have done that are wrong. And so what does that look like? Well, it looks like this. Because at a certain point, after we decide that we're only going to make loving choices and we're going to live up here, does that mean that these choices down here don't still exist? Does that mean that this path that we went down doesn't exist? This is that PTSD thing I'm talking about still. It says that we don't go down there anymore. We went there once, but if we don't go back there, it's only a potential that you can go through. Did you make that choice? Yeah, we made it. Did you make those bad decisions? Yeah, we made them. Are you going to go back there and do it again? No, I'm not. Does it still exist? Only as a potential. We live and move and have our very being on the loving side of things, and suddenly life is really good. And that's how you're able to work through it, and that's how you're able to strike it out of the book of remembrance. What it just means is not that those potentials are there, are not still there, because we always have free will, and not because that we didn't make those mistakes at one time, but because we just touched down there and said, nope, I'm not going to do that again. I'm not going to do the PTSD thing and repeat that negative cycle over and over. It literally just stays as a potential, and we live on the right side of it. There's my email address if you would like to have. As I said, I can send you the thing, the video, I think, is like 50 megabytes, so it won't go through email. But what you get there instead is a link to YouTube, in which, and by the way, what you see there is a 1-minute clip of about 3 minutes of different manifestations of that water freezing thing. So you'll be able to pull that out of there. So if you do want a copy of the PowerPoint presentation or any of the Cayce readings, I am glad to email that to you just by sending me an email asking for it. Questions? I've covered everything about in his presence. There is not one question to be had, which is good, because Marcy wants to go home.